Nanad, thank you for your kind introduction, and I will be presenting the objectives and approach to the study. My co-author, Kazuo Ishihara, will be talking about the analysis and the results. The issue of causality in advertising is one that has been a key issue since day one, essentially determining the effects of advertising on sales. And the problem has always been the same, namely determining effects other than advertising that impact on sales, so-called endogenous factors. To determine these endogenous factors and hold them constant, which is essential for relating advertising to sales, controlled experimentation is the ideal. And let me explain that. In controlled experimentation, we have a control group that is not exposed to advertising and an experimental group that is. They are matched on factors such as age, gender, income, purchase frequency, that is factors that might impact on sales. And in matching these groups, this results in an essential assumption, namely that the endogenous factors, the factors other than advertising impacting on sales, will affect each group equally because they are matched. Now, in actual experimentation, in actual campaigns, which would be in the next slide, we really cannot control for heterogeneity and endogeneity. That is, we cannot control for matching groups because the exposed and unexposed groups are going to be different. We cannot control for endogeneity because there are going to be factors other than advertising impacting on sales. So we are left with the need to use observational data. Next slide. And the use of observational data has become more viable because of the increasing prominence of single source data, namely the fact that we can relate what people see to what they buy, meaning that we can determine the sales among exposed and unexposed groups. Now, that still leaves us with the problem of heterogeneity and endogeneity, because even with observational data, those groups are not necessarily going to be matched, and factors other than advertising are going to impact on sales. So we must control for endogeneity and heterogeneity. And next slide. There are two factors that we have to control for in endogeneity, namely targeting induced endogeneity. That is the fact that marketers tend to target heavy buyers, meaning that sales will result independent of advertising effects. And exposure-induced endogeneity, that is the predisposition among some respondents to watch advertising, resulting in exposure independent of advertising effects. As for heterogeneity, we would like to, next slide. As for heterogeneity, we would like to ensure that the controlled and experimental groups are accounted for in terms of factors that might impact on sales, such as age, income, gender, purchase frequency, and we want to account for those factors. That said, let me turn it over to Kazuo, who will be talking about the approach as far as controlling for both endogeneity and heterogeneity.
Thank you, Henry. So now we turn to empirical illustration. So the data we are going to use comes from Nielsen Katarina solution. It's a single source data set on chocolate candy from March 2015 to June 2016. During this period, there was a TV advertising campaign from March to June 2016. So the data covers both pre-campaign period and campaign period. And we have more than 400,000 households in our data set. And in addition to purchase record, we have information about demographics, such as income, age, race, gender, and education. As Henry noted, in order to estimate the sales lift or impact of advertising on sales, we will combine two methods. The first method is called difference in differences approach. Essentially, in this approach, we compare purchase behavior across treated groups. In our context, those who are exposed to an ad during campaign period, and control group, in our case, those who are not exposed to an ad even during the campaign period. And we try to look at the difference in behavior between these two groups of consumers. But in addition to that, we also need to compare how consumers change their purchase behavior before and after being exposed to an advertising. Okay, so in the mathematical notation, as you see, there's an equation we put here, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to explain this. But beta 3, you see in this equation, that essentially measures the incremental advertising effects of those exposed to an ad on the candy versus those not exposed, while accounting for pre-campaign behavior. And we could, essentially apply our data set to this difference in differences methodology. But one issue here is that whether consumers get an exposure to an ad or not is not random, as Henry noted. It could be endogenous, and it could depend on many factors that is correlated with their purchase behavior. So in order to look into that, in the next slide, we will apply what's called propensity score matching method. So essentially in the propensity score matching method, we will try to find two groups of people who have a similar likelihood of being exposed to an advertising, okay, based on demographic information or based on purchase behavior. But it so happens that in the data, one group of consumers got exposed to an advertising, but another group didn't. So we can essentially compare, by comparing these two groups of people, we can essentially, estimate the ad effectiveness. And then propensity score matching essentially help create these two groups of people. Now we are going to summarize our findings. So I'm going to show you three sets of findings. So the first set, as you see that in table 4, there are two columns, non-matching and matching. And then, as we said, as I mentioned, beta 3 is the parameter for capturing the effectiveness of advertising. So under non-matching, we reported results when we do not control for endogeneity, meaning that we did not apply the propensity score matching. And then there, we see no effect of advertising. So negative 0.002, and this is not statistically significant. But after controlling for other exposure endogeneity, under matching, we see a positive and significant ad effectiveness, 0.005, which essentially means that the ad exposure increased the probability of purchasing the brand by 0.5 percentage point. And in addition to the main results, we also looked into the heterogeneous ad effect. Essentially, we want to understand whether ad is more effective for heavy buyers or light buyers, light users or light buyers. And you see in table 5, there are 3 columns. Essentially, the 3 columns differ in their way of, cutting the consumers into heavy versus light. So the first column shows 50%, 50% split. The second, 25 to 75 split. And then the third column, 10 to 90% split. And across the board, the beta 4, so this is actually the ad effects for bottom segment. So in our context, it's a light user. And these are all positive and significant. So the light users, actually, we can expect a positive and significant ad effectiveness. And beta 7 is an incremental effects for top segment. So in our case, heavy user segment. And then we see that all these incremental effects are negative, meaning that the ad effectiveness will decrease for heavy user segment. So this result essentially confirmed that the advertising in our application is more effective for light users. And just to show again what's going to happen if we do not control for the endogeneity. So this is the table that shows the results when we ignore the endogeneity. And then you'll probably notice that the beta 7 parameter, which is the incremental effects for heavy user, now turn from negative number to a positive number, meaning that the ad is more effective for heavy users than for light user. So this is essentially misleading results. So in summary, so here are our takeaways. So we essentially try to highlight the importance of controlling for endogeneity of ad exposure. And in controlling for endogeneity and accounting for heterogeneity in the TV advertising to sales relationship, causal effects showed that the campaign for the focal brand in our context was most effective in influencing light as opposed to heavy users. And then also, as we just showed, failure to control for endogeneity results in the opposite effects. That is, the campaign is most effective in influencing heavy users. So that's all we have. Thank you so much.